Well, welcome to the 700 Club, a rolling reopen. It could happen as early as May. Which parts of the U.S. opening are going to open up as officials evaluate the risk? In an exclusive interview with CBN News, Vice President Pence says the country is making real progress. What message does he have for pastors during this COVID crisis? What's coming up? But first, Gary Lane begins our coverage.
When and how will the economy reopen? The administration starting to consider these questions as the U.S. appears to be reaching the apex of the coronavirus. But even though hospitalizations are going down in New York, infections are still climbing in some parts of the country. So with the COVID-19 virus still spreading, might the opening of the economy be delayed?
The models do show that we are very close to the peak, and so I think that information is accurate. But I think it's just too early for us to say whether May 1st is that date. But more to come on that as we learn more information and as our planning proceeds.
Dr. Fauci telling CNN the country will likely see a rolling reopen, with different areas opening up as they evaluate the risk.
It is not going to be a light switch that we say, okay, it is now June, July, or whatever, click, the light switch goes back on. It's going to be depending where you are in the country.
Neil Kashkari, Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis president, agrees, predicting rolling shutdowns over the next 18 months.
It seems like we're going to have various phases of rolling flare-ups, different parts of the economy turning back on, maybe turning back off again. This could be a long, hard road that we have ahead of us.
Most Easter services were streamed online Sunday. But some churches celebrated the resurrection of Christ in church buildings or parking lots. In Kentucky, Governor Andy Beshear warned that people of his state attending services in person would be required to self-quarantine for 14 days. In Houston, Lakewood Church pastor Joel Osteen streamed his church's Easter service online.
Lord, I thank you that you're bigger than a virus.
In Jackson, Mississippi, Pastor Jesse Horton allowed church members to worship inside by practicing social distancing.
My concern is, why is it that everything else can be open?
But some localities are cracking down on churches that defy stay-at-home orders. Police issued $500 tickets to church members attending drive-in services at the Temple Baptist Church in Greenville, Mississippi. That raised the ire of constitutionalists and Christians around the country. Safeguarding religious freedom rights during the pandemic is also a concern of Attorney General William Barr. A Department of Justice spokesperson tweeting that, quote, AG Barr is monitoring government regulation of religious services. While social distancing policies are appropriate during this emergency, they must be applied even-handedly and not single out religious organizations. Expect action from the DOJ next week. Vice President Mike Pence has a message for pastors navigating the social guidelines. In an exclusive interview with CBN's David Brody, he discussed COVID-19's impact on the church and the economy.
How close can we get?
No, boom. You're perfect. You got tested, right?
I did. And with a COVID-19 elbow bump, the interview with the vice president was on, but not before the White House medical unit had given me a rapid test for the virus. It came back negative, but the more pressing issue, will America hear some positive news soon about getting back to normal? How confident are you that after April 30th, we may see some difference here in the economy and getting back to normal?
David, we're seeing real progress. We're going to be following the data very carefully, but if as some of the experts suggest, if we are nearing the peak of the coronavirus and if Americans continue to do what they've been doing now for weeks across the country, we believe we'd be in a very different place come the end of April, and we'll be able to bring forward recommendations.
It's clear the federal government lagged on testing early, mainly due to a bureaucratic process full of red tape. Pence says the model is now changing because the administration is getting the private sector more heavily involved.
We've developed all new testing format. Abbott Laboratories has a 15-minute test. I think you just took it, that we're working to make available all across the country. And but the reality was there were always many test kits out there, but the ability to process them rapidly was what the president addressed when we brought the full power of the private sector together. We're going to continue to scale and increase the amount of testing during this epidemic, but also create a foundation for a new, modern, rapid testing system for coronavirus and other diseases for years to come.
While the testing is getting better, people of faith still must follow guidelines, which means no in-person church services. Most have obeyed, and doors remain closed.
Our churches and synagogues and communities of faith across America have risen to the challenge.
But a handful of churches are still worshiping in person, a fact that Pence addresses biblically. What's your message to those that are still holding services in the pews?
I would just remind as a brother in Christ that, you know, where two or more are gathered, there he is also. We're all making do, but we can still worship, we can still practice our faith, and practice the really important social distancing that at this time in the life of our nation is just so important.
Also important, he says, giving to places of worship during this critical time.
Even if you're not in the pew on Sunday, that ministry is still going on. And so to the extent that you're able to continue to contribute to your local church, your local synagogue, your ministry, we encourage you to do that, because those communities of faith are making such an immense difference.
Congress is trying to make a difference too by spending lots of money. So far, Pence likes what he sees.
It really has been a testament of Congress working at its best. The average family of four by this time next week will receive a direct payment of $3,400 to assist them during this time. But for small businesses around the country, we've literally enrolled thousands upon thousands of companies in the Paycheck Protection Program, which will allow small businesses to keep people on the payroll for 2 months.
Still, the squabbling continues.
Look, there'll be issues that will be debated in the days ahead.
Especially on nationwide mail-in balloting, something Democrats are pushing to get funded. Republicans say it's political. Do you think the mail-in balloting, in terms of the funding that Democrats want, do you believe that is political in nature?
Well, I'd leave that to others, and that'll be an important debate in the days ahead. Our objective right now is to put the coronavirus in the past.
And as leader of the coronavirus task force, he believes there will indeed be light at the end of this very dark and tumultuous tunnel. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
It's an excellent interview. Ladies and gentlemen, my feeling is, I saw a guy named Steve Hilton, who's a commentator for Fox, and he's a Brit, and he had a pretty good proposal. He said, why don't we, if we get adequate testing, why don't we isolate those people who are the most vulnerable, those who are liable to die if they get this thing, and put them in quarantine, let the rest of the economy go free. I really think that we have damaged the economy. One of the big firms is estimating, I believe it was Chase Manhattan or JP Morgan Chase, that our GDP may be cut in half because of this thing. And the suffering is going to go on for years. And it just seems like to me we have handled it a little bit wrong. We have shut the economy down, just bang, and everybody. And these small businessmen are suffering, businessmen and women. They've put their life savings into these restaurants. The restaurants are closed. They won't be able to come back. We do have paycheck protection, but that's minimal. The Federal Reserve is putting a big chunk of money into the market to try to make loans available to small businesses, but it may be too little too late. But this virus is, I think, we've handled it wrong. There's something the matter, and the United States now has more cases of this stuff than any other nation and more deaths. And somehow we haven't done things right. And I think in terms of protective gear, the nurses are on the front line and they are actually dying because they have to use garbage bags for protective gear. They don't have enough of those important masks that will block out these bugs. And It's a shame that somehow we haven't gotten ahead of this. I think in terms of Peter Navarro is our trade representative, and good for him. But I think we need a general who's used from the Quartermaster Corps, who's used to mobilizing large amounts of material. And we need something for those first responders as quickly as we possibly can. But we're going to come out of it, but it's going to be a different nation than we've ever had before. And we've got to be very much in prayer for this country during these days. Well, in other news, there's good news and amazing things that have happened in Britain. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says things could have gone either way in his fight with the coronavirus. He's thanking the medical staff for saving his life. John Jessup has more.
That's right, Pat. The Prime Minister is out of the hospital and recuperating at his country retreat. To the doctors and nurses who cared for him, he says, quote, "I can't thank them enough. I owe them my life," end quote, specifically mentioning 2 nurses who kept watch over him for 48 hours. Johnson spent 7 nights in the hospital, including several days in the intensive care unit. The Prime Minister also thanked the British people for their self-isolation efforts to defeat the virus. COVID-19 has taken the lives of more than 10,000 people in the United Kingdom. Well, America is sending Italy medical supplies and other help it needs to fight the coronavirus. That's because Italy isn't getting the help it would like from the European Union. The pandemic is revealing rifts in the EU as nations seal off their borders and leaders react slowly to help their suffering neighbors. Dale Hurd has a story.
Whatever happened to all that preaching from Brussels about the glories of open borders? In Europe, that dirty word called nationalism has made a comeback, at least judging from all the nations that have closed their borders to protect themselves from coronavirus. Belgium even used a dumpster to block this route from the Netherlands. The coronavirus pandemic has shown the disunion among the nations of the EU. The European Union was supposed to be one community, but some of its nations aren't acting like it. When the EU gathered for an online summit and Italy and Spain begged for financial aid, Germany and the Netherlands basically said drop dead. EU leaders finally agreed on assistance, but not the economic bailout Italy and Spain said they needed. Some Italians took to burning the EU flag on social media with the hashtag #WeWillSaveOurselves.
I think it exposes the union for what it is, which is something very superficial and ultimately something that is not working.
Italian freelance journalist Alessandra Bocchi, who has written for the Wall Street Journal, told us the EU is so far failing perhaps its greatest test by being so slow-footed to help hard-hit nations like Italy.
Not only did the European Union not do anything at the beginning, it actually aggravated the situation from an economic point of view. And there was no solidarity because other European countries were just shutting down their borders. There wasn't really that kind of assistance that you would expect from a union.
As the world's second-largest economy, the European Union was built on the free movement of people and goods. The 26-nation Schengen area is supposed to be one huge zone without any border controls. Coronavirus has brought all that to a screeching halt, with a 37-mile backup at the German-Polish border, and similar scenes of traffic chaos across Europe. Even the EU's top scientist has quit, saying there's been no coordinated EU effort to fight COVID-19. It's basically been every nation for itself. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thanks, Dale. The world's oil producers agreed to major cuts in production to prevent a collapse in prices. The United States, Russia, and Saudi Arabia led the coalition of 23 nations. They agreed to hold back 9.7 million barrels a day from global markets. That's about 13% of the world's total oil production. The agreement is aimed at ending a glut of oil flooding in the market due to reduced demand by the coronavirus pandemic, resulting in historically low prices. President Trump says the deal will save hundreds of thousands of energy jobs in America. Well, strong storms, including tornadoes, pounded the Deep South Sunday, killing at least 18 people, including 6 in both Georgia and 6 in Georgia and 11 in Mississippi. Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi all declaring states of emergency overnight. The storms damaged up to 300 homes and other buildings in northern Louisiana. The deadly weather continued to batter the South overnight, with much of the region under flash flood, tornado, and thunderstorm warnings and watches. Those storms are forecast to move up the East Coast and through the mid-Atlantic into the Northeast today. And Pat, just a lot of people hunkering down Easter Sunday evening.
Well, they sort of should be, but we're having very strong winds here. It's warmer, but I think there was some serious rain, serious flooding, coastal flooding, that kind of thing in the Northeast. And they're talking about snow up north.
They've had it, I think. Yes, I think they've had it. Someone sent a picture of Maine on Facebook that looked like Alaska.
Yeah, well, it's crazy. I can't understand it, but here it's quite warm and a lot of wind, but we'll see what happens.